A little girl secretly gave a rescue signal while sitting quietly in the park, and what happened after a police officer noticed will send chills down your spine. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this story from? Drop it in the comments, because I love to know where my viewers are from. Now let's begin the story. The late afternoon sun stretched across the city park, painting everything in a warm golden light. The air was calm, touched with that soft rustling of leaves that made the whole place feel alive but quiet, like nature itself was whispering. Children's laughter drifted from the playground swings, the metallic chains squeaking in rhythm. Parents called out reminders to be careful, joggers passed with steady breaths, and birds hopped in search of crumbs near the benches. To most people, it was just another peaceful day. But for Officer Daniel Reyes, peace was something he never trusted fully. At 35, Daniel had seen enough in his career to know that danger often hid behind the most ordinary scenes. Still, he liked the park patrol shifts. Compared to the constant blare of sirens and reports back at the precinct, walking through this stretch of green gave him space to breathe. It reminded him of his own childhood afternoons with his father, sitting on a bench, eating ice cream, and talking about dreams that never seemed to leave the park once they went home. Daniel tugged gently at the strap of his utility vest as he strolled along the gravel path. His dark brown eyes scanned the area in their usual quiet way, not with suspicion but with a sort of practiced attentiveness. He knew the regulars, the elderly couple who always fed the pigeons by the fountain, the group of teenage skateboarders practicing tricks by the concrete steps, the jogger in the bright red tracksuit who never missed a day. Everything looked familiar, predictable, safe. But then something shifted. As he passed near the west side of the park, where the benches sat in a long row beneath tall oaks, his gaze fell on a sight that made his steps falter. A little girl sat perched at the edge of one of the benches, a stuffed teddy bear pressed tightly against her chest. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her blonde hair was unkempt, strands sticking out as though it hadn't been brushed in days, and her pink dress was wrinkled and faintly dirty at the hem. She wasn't playing like the other children. She wasn't laughing or running. She was simply sitting there, silent, her small legs dangling off the bench. Beside her sat a man, mid-30s, maybe older, rough around the edges, with dark stubble along his jaw, a plain black t-shirt clinging to his muscular frame, and tattoos peeking from under his sleeves. His posture was relaxed, almost too relaxed, like someone who wanted to look casual, but didn't quite fit into the calm scene of the park. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't talking to the girl. He was just there. Daniel almost kept walking. Almost. But then he saw it. The little girl's small hand lifted, her palm facing outward, thumb tucked in, and fingers folding down slowly over it. It was so subtle, so small, that anyone else might have missed it. But Daniel's training had carved that image into his memory long ago. It was the silent rescue signal, the one taught in briefings about child safety, the one spread across social campaigns for victims of abuse or abduction to use when words could put them in more danger. Daniel's breath caught. His instincts sharpened instantly. The man beside her didn't notice. He was busy scanning his phone, his eyes fixed downward, thumbs scrolling. But the girl, she wasn't fidgeting like a bored child might. Her eyes were darting, searching, as if hoping someone, anyone, would notice. For the briefest moment, her gaze met Daniel's. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, desperate, like a flare shot into a stormy night sky, uncertain if anyone would see. Daniel forced himself to look away, pretending to adjust his radio, his heart thudding hard beneath his vest. His mind raced. Was he misinterpreting it? Kids did strange things with their hands all the time. But this didn't feel playful. It felt practiced, intentional. The man finally pocketed his phone and stood, gesturing for the girl to follow. She obeyed immediately, sliding off the bench and clutching her teddy bear even tighter, her knuckles white around its worn arm. Daniel noticed the way her shoulders hunched, the way her steps were small and hesitant. Every fiber in him screamed that something wasn't right. He started walking again, keeping a careful distance. His boots crunched lightly on the gravel, blending in with the ambient noise of the park. The pair moved toward the east exit, away from the playground and the families. The girl's hand brushed against the teddy's fur like it was the only anchor she had. Daniel's training told him to act cautiously. Protocol demanded evidence, clear, observable signs of abuse or threat. A hand signal, nervous body language, technically, those weren't enough. Confronting the man now without backup could blow the chance to help her if she truly was in danger. But doing nothing felt impossible. As he followed, Flashes of his past cases flickered in his mind. The ones where hesitation had cost too much. A boy left in an abusive home because the signs weren't conclusive. A girl who disappeared after neighbors ignored her quiet pleas. Daniel had promised himself never again. He'd promised that if he ever saw a child reaching for help, he wouldn't turn away. The man walked briskly, not looking back, his hand occasionally resting on the girl's shoulder in what might have looked like a protective gesture to anyone else. But to Daniel, it was controlling. Each time the hand touched her, her body stiffened, her head dropped lower. They passed a group of teens who barely noticed them, their laughter echoing as they filmed tricks on their phones. They passed a mother tying her son's shoelace, completely absorbed in her own little world. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else noticed the story unfolding right there in the open. But Daniel did. At the exit gate, the man paused to adjust something in his pocket. For a split second, Emma, Daniel realized he had heard the man mutter her name once. Emma glanced back. Her eyes locked with Daniel's again, wide, glistening, silently begging. It wasn't panic. It wasn't tears. It was that quiet, unbearable kind of hope. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand brushed over the radio at his shoulder, debating. He could call it in now, but without more evidence, he risked being pulled off the case before it even started. He could approach, but that could scare the man off, or worse, put Emma in greater danger. So he chose a third option. He slipped his sunglasses down over his eyes, lowered his head as if scrolling his phone, and trailed behind them casually, just another man in the park heading toward the same exit. His pulse hammered with every step, but his face betrayed nothing. Whatever was happening, whatever the truth was, he wasn't going to lose sight of that little girl. Not now. Not when she had sent out her silent cry for help. And so Daniel followed. The park faded behind them, its laughter and warmth dissolving into the ordinary hum of the city. Officer Daniel Reyes followed at a distance, careful not to draw attention, his boots crunching softly against the uneven sidewalk. The late afternoon sunlight had begun to thin, the golden glow turning pale as shadows stretched long across the ground. The air carried the faint smell of roasted peanuts from a nearby vendor, but Daniel hardly noticed. His focus was locked on the pair ahead, the rough-looking man and the little girl clutching her teddy bear like it was her last lifeline. The man's hand rested heavy on Emma's shoulder. It wasn't affectionate. Daniel could tell by the way her body reacted each time it landed there. Her small frame stiffened, her chin lowered further, and her steps seemed to shrink into themselves. Children should walk freely, sometimes skipping, sometimes dragging their feet with exaggerated sighs of boredom. They weren't built for the kind of rigid, restrained walk Emma carried, as though every step had to be careful, measured, unseen. Daniel's chest tightened. He thought of his niece, Sophia, just about Emma's age. When she walked with him, she tugged on his hand, pointing at every dog, every ice cream truck, every shiny balloon that caught her eye. She was loud and curious and utterly unafraid. That was how children were supposed to be. That was what childhood should look like. But Emma was quiet. Too quiet. Still, Daniel questioned himself. Was he projecting? Was his imagination running ahead of the facts? He had been in law enforcement long enough to know how tricky perception could be. Maybe this man was her father or her uncle. Maybe she was just tired or shy. He reminded himself that jumping to conclusions could lead to disaster. He had seen careers crumble over assumptions, seen innocent families disrupted because someone mistook caution for cruelty. His radio crackled softly at his side. He reached up, pressing a finger to the mic clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch," he said quietly. "This is Reyes. I'm on foot near Jefferson Park, east exit, trailing a man and a child. Possible situation." The dispatcher's calm voice came through the static. "Copy that, Reyes. Can you confirm the nature of the situation?" Daniel hesitated, his throat dry. What could he say? "I saw a little girl make a rescue signal." That wasn't protocol. He needed more. Something observable. Something concrete. Otherwise, it was just instinct. And instincts, while valuable, didn't hold up well in reports. "Not yet," he muttered, lowering his hand from the mic's standby. The man and Emma walked with steady purpose, heading toward the main road where traffic buzzed and horns flared impatiently. Daniel slowed slightly, weaving between other pedestrians, keeping just enough distance to appear like any other passerby. But his senses stayed sharp. The man's body language, the girl's silence, the teddy bear clutched so tightly it looked like the stitching might tear. Every detail painted a picture that Daniel couldn't ignore. At the corner, they stopped at a crosswalk. The light was red, halting the small crowd waiting to cross. Daniel drifted closer, careful not to stand directly behind them, but close enough to observe. The man kept one hand on Emma's shoulder, the grip firm, his fingers pressing into the thin fabric of her dress. She didn't flinch outwardly, but Daniel saw the way her tiny hands squeezed the teddy's paw, the way her bottom lip trembled ever so slightly before she bit it to still herself. The light turned green. The group moved across, feet shuffling against the painted lines. Daniel stayed a few paces back, blending in. On the other side, the man turned left, heading toward a bus stop. The sign stood tall at the corner, a schedule flapping loosely against the metal pole. A few people were already waiting, an older woman with grocery bags, a young man with earbuds nodding to music only he could hear. The man led Emma straight to the bench, guiding her to sit. He stayed standing, pulling out his phone again, his thumb scrolling in quick flicks. Emma sat quietly, Teddy in her lap. For a brief moment, as if sensing the sliver of safety that came from being in a semi-public place, she tilted her head. Her eyes searched the crowd, and then found Daniel. It was the same look as before. Desperate. Silent. Pleading. Daniel's chest constricted. That look, the raw need in a child's eyes, was something he would never forget. He'd seen it in shelters, in hospital rooms, in the faces of children who had slipped through the cracks until someone finally noticed. And now, here it was again, staring directly at him. He shifted his weight, pretending to check the time on his watch, his gaze never fully leaving her. He wanted to act. Every fiber of his being screamed to step forward, to confront the man, to ask Emma if she was safe. But the training echoed in his mind, don't escalate without cause. If the man was dangerous and Daniel pushed too soon, Emma could pay the price. His radio buzzed again. Reyes, status check? The dispatcher asked. He pressed the mic lightly, his voice low. Still observing. At the corner of Jefferson and Pine. Child may be in distress. There was a pause then. Do you want backup? Daniel exhaled, staring at Emma, at the way she hunched over her teddy. He wanted to say yes. But he knew how long backup could take in the city. By then, the bus could arrive, the man could vanish with her, and the chance to intervene would be gone. Negative for now, Daniel said finally. Holding position. He released the mic, his jaw tight. He hated this. The waiting. The uncertainty. His gut told him Emma needed help, but his brain warned him to tread carefully. One wrong move, and he could lose both the girl and the chance to stop whatever was happening. The sound of brakes hissing pulled him from his thoughts. The bus had arrived, its large frame groaning as it came to a stop in front of the bench. The doors swung open with a pneumatic sigh, and the small group of people shuffled to board. The man pocketed his phone, gestured for Emma to stand, and placed his hand firmly against her back, guiding her toward the doors. She obeyed, still silent, still clutching her teddy like a shield. Daniel's heart pounded. This was it, the moment. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, just far enough away that he could let them go without anyone noticing. He could let them board, watch the bus drive off, and return to the station with nothing more than a report of suspicion. It would be safer, cleaner, easier. But then Emma glanced back again. Just before she stepped onto the bus, her head turned. Her eyes, those wide, desperate eyes, found his once more. And in them, Daniel saw not just fear but trust. A fragile, trembling trust that he would do something, that he wouldn't let her disappear. The man nudged her forward, up the steps, and onto the bus. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His pulse roared in his ears. He had to decide. Right here. Right now. Would he follow them onto that bus, or let them vanish into the city? Daniel made his decision in the span of a breath. The bus doors had already begun to close when he surged forward, slipping between two passengers with a quick, apologetic nod. The driver, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, gave him a cursory glance but said nothing. He tapped his fare card, the machine chirping approval, and then he moved down the narrow aisle, every sense on alert. The man had guided Emma to a seat halfway down, near the window. She sat pressed against the glass, her small shoulders turned inward, Teddy clutched tightly in her lap. The man settled beside her, casual in posture, but his eyes flicked around once, sharp, watchful, like someone aware of being followed. Daniel dropped into a seat several rows back, careful to angle his body slightly away, so his gaze wouldn't be obvious. He wanted to be close enough to observe, but far enough to blend into the blur of passengers. The engine rumbled, and the bus lurched forward, pulling away from the curb. The city outside passed in a rhythm of gray sidewalks, neon shop signs, and pedestrians carrying bags of groceries or staring down at glowing phones. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, just the low murmur of two teenagers in the back and the faint buzz of headphones leaking music. Daniel's eyes drifted to Emma. Children, especially at that age, rarely sat perfectly still. They kicked their feet against the seat, fidgeted with zippers, twisted in their spot to see the world through different angles of the window. But Emma was frozen. Her little hands clenched the teddy so tightly that the frayed stitching at the seams seemed ready to burst. Her gaze stayed low, barely lifting even when the bus hit a bump. Daniel's stomach tightened. He remembered a training seminar from years ago, an FBI agent lecturing on nonverbal distress signals in children. The absence of normal behavior, the man had said, is often as telling as the presence of abnormal behavior. Silence could scream louder than noise, and Emma's silence was deafening. The man leaned toward her slightly, his lips moving. Daniel couldn't hear the words over the hum of the bus, but the tone carried. Casual, almost paternal. It might have sounded normal to anyone else. A stranger would think he was comforting her, telling her they'd be home soon, or reminding her not to drop her toy. But Daniel saw Emma's reaction. Her shoulders flinched, her grip on the teddy bear tightened further, and she gave the tiniest nod, a nod that wasn't agreement but compliance. That one detail burned into Daniel's chest. His doubts rose like unwelcome shadows. What if he's her father? What if she's just shy or tired or upset about something else? What if I'm projecting my own fears? He leaned back against the seat, closing his eyes briefly, but the image that surfaced wasn't Emma's, it was Sophia's, his niece. He remembered a family picnic last summer, when she had run up to him with ice cream dripping down her chin, laughing as she tugged on his arm to push her on the swings. She had been so carefree, so full of life. If she had ever looked at him with the kind of pleading, fearful eyes Emma carried, he would have burned the world down to protect her. Daniel opened his eyes. No, this wasn't projection. His instincts, honed over years of dealing with liars, abusers, and predators, weren't wrong. Something was happening here. Something dangerous. The bus swayed as it turned down narrower streets. Daniel noticed the shift in scenery. The storefronts grew less polished, the sidewalks cracked, graffiti spreading across the walls of abandoned buildings. The advertisements on the bus stop benches changed from slick tech ads to peeling posters for payday loans and eviction defense services. This wasn't a neighborhood Daniel patrolled often, but he knew its reputation. Rundown. Overlooked. The kind of place where trouble didn't just visit, it settled in. The man shifted in his seat, pulling his phone out again. Daniel tilted slightly, trying to catch a reflection in the window, but all he could see was the glow of the screen casting hard lines across the man's face. The man scrolled quickly, pausing once to type a message. His other hand rested firmly on his thigh, close enough to Emma that she sat rigid, as if boxed in by his presence. Daniel pressed his thumb against the mic on his radio, then hesitated. If he called it in now, what would he say? Suspicious man. Possibly abducted child. No hard evidence. He could already hear the dispatcher's measured tone asking for more details, and he didn't have them. Not yet. If he made the wrong move and this turned out to be nothing, it would be a career bruise he might not recover from. But if he did nothing, and it was real, he'd never forgive himself. The bus slowed again, brakes hissing. A couple of passengers shuffled off, their bags rustling. Daniel's heart climbed into his throat when he saw the man stand, nudging Emma to her feet. She obeyed without a sound, teddy tucked under her chin, and together they moved toward the doors. Daniel stayed seated until the last second, then rose as well, exiting with another small group of passengers to avoid standing out. The air outside hit colder than before, carrying the scent of damp concrete and faint cigarette smoke. The neighborhood was unfamiliar to him, its streets lined with faded brick buildings and chain-link fences, sagging under the weight of rust. A corner store with a flickering neon, open sign buzzed weakly, and further down the block, an alley yawned dark and narrow between two shuttered laundromats. The man walked with purpose, hand firm on Emma's shoulder again, guiding her down the cracked sidewalk. Daniel followed at a careful distance, keeping his pace casual, like any pedestrian heading somewhere else. He scanned the area, noting exits, windows, blind spots. His training took over, turning the decaying street into a tactical map in his mind. They walked for nearly 5 minutes, deeper into the neighborhood, until the man finally slowed in front of a squat, shabby apartment complex. The paint peeled in strips from the walls, exposing weather-worn brick beneath. A broken swing set leaned crookedly in the courtyard, its chains squeaking softly as the wind shifted. The entryway was dim, the buzzer panel smeared with grime and stickers. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary stop. He could feel it, the weight of the moment pressing down. Emma glanced back once, almost imperceptibly, her eyes flicking toward him before the man nudged her inside. The heavy door closed behind them with a dull thud. Daniel stopped across the street, staring at the building. His fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. This was it. The line he couldn't step back from. Whatever waited inside that apartment complex wasn't good. He knew it in his bones. And yet, he was alone. No backup. No warrant. No clear evidence. But he had Emma's eyes. And sometimes, he thought grimly, that had to be enough. Daniel stood across the street, the dying light of late afternoon, painting the cracked facade of the apartment complex in muted orange. His eyes tracked the peeling numbers nailed above the entrance, Building 24. The digits looked as though they had been there for decades, rust eating away at their edges until they barely clung to the wall. The entire place carried that same tired weight. Broken shutters dangled loosely from second-floor windows, paint stripped by seasons of rain and neglect. The chain-link fence around the courtyard sagged inward like a weary old man, litter caught in its rusted wire. Daniel adjusted his stance, forcing himself to take in every detail, committing the scene to memory. If this turned into an investigation, he'd need to recall it all, the location, the entrance, possible escape routes. His gaze traveled upward, tracing the stairwells that zigzagged along the exterior. They were made of iron, but even from a distance, he could see patches of rust spreading like disease across their frame. Every step groaned as the man guided Emma up, his large hand still clasping her small shoulder. Daniel's throat tightened. The sight of her fragile frame disappearing up those stairs made his chest ache. He touched the mic clipped to his vest, thumb hovering over the transmit button. A dozen possible phrases ran through his mind: possible abduction, child at risk, request immediate backup. But he stopped himself. He didn't have enough. Not yet. If dispatch flagged it and this turned out to be nothing, his credibility would be shot. His sergeant had already warned him once about gut feelings, leading to wasted patrol time. Instead, Daniel shifted, choosing a safer route. He pressed the button and spoke evenly, masking the urgency in his chest. Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. I'm conducting a routine community check near 8th and Willow, Building 24. I'll be in the area for a while. It was vague enough to justify his presence if anyone asked, but it kept the door open for reinforcements if he needed them. Copy that, Reyes, came the reply, crackling through the static. He released the mic and exhaled, eyes locked on the building. From his position beneath a half-dead street lamp, Daniel had a decent vantage point of the front entrance. The man and Emma disappeared inside after climbing to the second floor, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind them with a hollow clang. Daniel listened as the sound echoed across the courtyard, fading into silence. For a moment, he just stood there. The neighborhood seemed unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, followed by the rumble of a passing truck. But here, outside Building 24, the air felt heavy. Oppressive. His instincts screamed at him to move, to follow, to do something. But his training tugged him back. Wait. Observe. Don't escalate without cause. That eternal push and pull tore at him. He shifted his weight, jaw clenched. His mind, unbidden, dragged him backward in time. It was 5 years ago, another cold night, another call he hadn't taken seriously enough. He and his then-partner, Marquez, had been dispatched to a possible disturbance at a suburban house. The neighbors had reported shouting, maybe a child crying, but when they arrived, the place had been quiet. Lights off. Curtains drawn. Daniel had suggested knocking, pushing further, but Marquez had shrugged. It's late. Probably a domestic spat. If they need us, they'll call. Daniel remembered standing there on the porch, his knuckles hovering over the door. He had felt it, the same gnawing sense of wrongness, but he'd let hesitation win. He'd walked away. 2 days later, the news broke. The same house. A woman and her 8-year-old son, found beaten and lifeless inside. The husband had fled, leaving a trail of evidence, so clear even rookies could have caught it had they entered that night. The memory burned like acid. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw the boy's shoes by the door, small and untied, waiting for feet that would never return. Never again, he thought, fists curling. I won't freeze. Not this time. Across the street, a curtain twitched. Daniel focused, breath catching. It was the second floor, third window from the left. The glass was cloudy with grime, but behind it, a faint shadow shifted. And then, he heard it. A voice. So soft he almost thought he imagined it. A child's voice, muffled by the glass and distance. High, fragile, and wavering. Help! Daniel's heart jolted. The sound cut off abruptly, replaced by silence so thick it made his ears ring. He strained, leaning forward slightly, every muscle tense. No footsteps, no shouting, no second cry. Just stillness. Then, the curtain fell back into place. Darkness swallowed the window. Daniel's breath came faster now, adrenaline flooding his veins. He stared at the spot, refusing to blink, willing another sign to appear. Nothing. Had she really called out? Or was his mind, laden with memory and fear, playing tricks on him? He swallowed hard. No. He knew what he'd heard. And now, the silence pressed heavier than ever, as though the building itself had closed its throat. Somewhere inside Building 24, Emma was trapped. And she had just asked him for help. Daniel shifted his stance, gaze hardening. Backup or no backup, he couldn't stay outside any longer. Daniel's boots scraped softly against the cracked pavement as he crossed the street toward Building 24. Each step seemed louder than it should have, echoing in his ears, but he didn't slow. His chest felt tight, not with fear, but with that sharp mix of anticipation and dread he had felt so many times before, the cocktail of instincts screaming that something was wrong. The door to the building loomed in front of him, a heavy slab of weathered metal with a push bar streaked in rust. He pressed it open, and the hinges shrieked in protest. The sound rattled up the stairwell, bouncing through the stale air of the interior hallway. Daniel paused for just a heartbeat, listening, before stepping inside. The air hit him like a wall. Stale. Damp. Carrying the faint odor of mold and something else, grease maybe, or old cooking oil that had seeped into the building's bones. The hallway was dim, lit only by a buzzing fluorescent tube that flickered every few seconds. The plaster on the walls had cracked into spiderweb patterns, and graffiti scrawled in faded spray paint crawled across the chipped paint. Daniel moved slowly, every sense alert. His hand hovered close to the sidearm at his belt, not because he intended to draw it, but because training had drilled into him the comfort of readiness. He replayed the image of Emma's small figure pressed against the man's side, the fear in her eyes, the whispered help that still echoed in his ears. He reached the second floor. His boots creaked against the metal grating of the stairwell. Ahead of him stretched a narrow hallway lined with doors, each one identical except for the numbers screwed haphazardly into their frames. He counted silently until his eyes landed on the third door from the left, the one he had seen Emma vanish behind. Apartment 2C. Daniel steadied his breathing. His plan had to be cautious. If he barged in without cause, he could spook the man into doing something reckless, or worse, make Emma's situation more dangerous. He needed to tread carefully. He lifted his hand and knocked. 3 solid raps against the thin wood. For a long moment, there was silence. Daniel listened closely, tilting his head. He thought he heard the faint scrape of movement inside, then a pause, as if someone were deciding whether to answer. Finally, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened a crack, then wider. The man stood there. Up close, Daniel could see more than he had in the park or on the bus. The man was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. His jaw was covered with uneven stubble, his dark hair unkempt, his t-shirt stained with something greasy. His eyes, narrow, sharp, too alert, met Daniel's, and for a fraction of a second, Daniel saw the flicker of recognition. "Evening," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm, professional but friendly. "I'm Officer Reyes. We're doing some routine community safety checks in the area. Just wanted to introduce myself and see how everything's going in the building." The man blinked, then shifted his stance so that his body filled the doorway. His hand rested against the doorframe, casual but firm, blocking the view inside. His expression tilted toward polite, but there was a tightness around his mouth, a defensive edge. "Oh," the man said after a beat. His voice was low, steady. "Didn't know the police did safety checks." "Every now and then," Daniel replied smoothly. "Just making sure residents feel safe, no issues in the neighborhood." He kept his tone light, as if this were nothing more than small talk. But his eyes tracked every detail, the man's posture, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he avoided glancing back into the apartment. "Everything's fine," the man said. "No problems here." Daniel nodded, pretending to accept the answer. Then, casually, he tilted his head, as if remembering something. "I saw you earlier at the park, right? With the little girl?" The man's eyes flickered, barely a second, but Daniel caught it. A flash of calculation. "Yeah," the man said quickly. "That's my niece." Emma. Niece, Daniel echoed, his voice even. She lives with you? The man shook his head. Nah, just visiting. Her mom's out of town for work, so I'm watching her for a bit. Something about the way he said it didn't ring right. Too rehearsed, too neat. Daniel kept his face neutral. Got it. Always good when family can help out, Daniel said. He shifted slightly, trying to angle his body to see past the man into the apartment. But the man leaned subtly, blocking the gap. Daniel glimpsed only fragments: a sagging couch, stained carpet, a cluttered coffee table with empty bottles and fast food wrappers. No toys. No coloring books. No shoes small enough for a 7-year-old. The absence screamed louder than anything he could have seen. Well, Daniel said, pulling back slightly, if you or your niece need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. The man gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Appreciate it, officer. But we're fine. He shifted, hand tightening slightly on the doorframe, as if eager to end the conversation. Daniel lingered just a moment longer, then nodded. Good to hear. Have a good night. He turned and began walking down the hallway, every nerve in his body on high alert. His steps were steady, but his thoughts churned. Every detail of that exchange gnawed at him: the defensiveness, the absence of childlike clutter, the way Emma hadn't appeared. When he reached the stairwell, he let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His instincts screamed louder now than ever. Something was off. He knew it in his bones. Still, without proof, his hands were tied. He couldn't kick down the door on a feeling, no matter how strong it was. He needed to be smart. He descended the stairs, the groan of the old metal echoing through the building. At the bottom, he pushed open the heavy door and stepped back into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the sky deepening toward twilight. Daniel paused on the sidewalk, glancing back up at the windows of apartment 2C. They were dark now, curtains drawn tight. The building stood silent, unyielding. And then, it came faint but clear, carried on the still evening air. A muffled sound. High-pitched. Fragile. A sob. Daniel froze, every muscle locked. His breath hitched, heart pounding against his ribs. It lasted only a second, then cut off, swallowed by the silence of the building. But it was enough. Emma was in there. And she was crying. Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned slightly, eyes narrowing on the second-floor window. His decision crystallized, hard and certain. He couldn't walk away. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the precinct felt louder than usual. Daniel sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen painting his face in pale blue. The rest of the station buzzed with its usual nighttime rhythm. Phones ringing, officers filing reports, the occasional chatter of the dispatch radio. But to Daniel, all of it faded into the background. His focus was razor-sharp, fixed on the memory of the muffled sob he had heard through the cracked window of apartment 2C. He tapped his pen restlessly against the desk, his leg bouncing under the table. Across the room, Sergeant Miller emerged from his office, coffee in hand. The older man carried himself with the kind of posture that came from decades in uniform, straight-backed, steady, the sort of presence that commanded respect without needing to raise his voice. His hair was thinning, his face lined from years of stress and sleepless nights, but his eyes were sharp. Always watching. Reyes, Miller said, stepping up to Daniel's desk. You've been brooding since you came back. What's on your mind? Daniel looked up, debating how much to reveal. He didn't want to sound reckless. But the urgency burning in his gut refused to let him play it down. I think we've got a problem, Daniel said finally, leaning forward. That man I saw with the little girl earlier, it doesn't add up. He claims she's his niece, but nothing about that apartment looked like a place where a child lives. No toys, no books, nothing. And she never showed her face while I was there. Miller set his coffee on the desk and crossed his arms, listening with that measured silence he was known for. You think, Miller said after a pause. His tone wasn't dismissive, but firm. That's not proof. You know the drill, Reyes. Instincts are good, but they don't hold up in court. If you're wrong, you're harassing an innocent man. That'll come back to bite you. Daniel clenched his jaw. He hated this part, the bureaucracy, the waiting, the need to tiptoe around procedure when a child's safety might be at risk. Still, Miller was right. They couldn't act on feelings alone. I know, Daniel said, his voice low but steady. But something's off. I felt it the second I saw her in that supermarket. Kids don't whisper for help unless they mean it. Miller studied him for a long moment, his gaze heavy. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. All right. Look into it quietly. Background check, address records, whatever you can dig up. But Reyes, he leaned closer, his voice dropping. Don't storm in there on your own. Don't do something that'll put that kid, or yourself, in more danger. You hear me? Daniel nodded. I hear you. Miller gave him one last searching look before retreating toward his office. Daniel exhaled slowly, shoulders heavy with the weight of the unspoken. Miller had said the words, but Daniel could read between the lines. The sergeant trusted him, but only if he stayed within the boundaries. Boundaries. Daniel's lips thinned into a grim line. Boundaries didn't mean much when a child's life was on the line. Hours later, the precinct had quieted. The night shift officers filtered in, the earlier buzz fading into the steady rhythm of paperwork and late calls. Daniel sat hunched over his computer, the glow of the monitor reflecting in his tired eyes. He typed the man's name into the system, Carl Turner. That's what the man had given when Daniel casually asked during their doorstep conversation. It was a start, but the system spat out nothing substantial. No criminal record. No traffic tickets. No property ownership under that name at apartment 2C. Daniel frowned. Either the man had kept himself squeaky clean, or the name was fake. He dug deeper, cross-referencing utility records, cross-checking with phone directories. Still nothing. Carl Turner was a ghost. Daniel leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Frustration gnawed at him. He'd been here before, cases where the trail was thin, where bureaucracy slowed things to a crawl. And too many times, it ended with a child gone before anyone could act. He pulled out his phone and stared at the contact list. His thumb hovered over a name. Clara. His sister. For a long moment, he debated. He hadn't spoken to her much recently. Life had pulled them in different directions. But suddenly, he needed to hear her voice. Not as an officer, but as a brother. He dialed. After 2 rings, she answered. Danny. Clara's voice was warm, surprised. You don't usually call this late. Everything okay? Daniel hesitated. He could hear faint background noise, a TV maybe, and the sound of her young son laughing in the distance. Yeah, Daniel said softly. Just needed to hear a familiar voice. There was a pause on the other end. That doesn't sound like you. What's going on? Daniel stared at the clutter of papers on his desk, the empty coffee cups, the case file that wasn't even officially open. He let out a slow breath. There's this girl, he said finally. I think she's in trouble, but I don't have enough to prove it yet. Clara was silent for a moment, then her tone shifted, gentle but serious. You've always had that sense, Danny. Even as kids, you were the one watching out for me. Remember when I got lost at the county fair? You found me in 5 minutes, while Mom and Dad were panicking. Daniel smiled faintly at the memory, though it was bittersweet. You were hiding by the cotton candy stand. I just knew where you'd go. You've always known where to look, Clara said softly. If your gut is telling you something, don't ignore it. But be careful. Promise me you'll be careful. Daniel swallowed hard. I promise. They spoke for a few more minutes, light talk, memories, Clara's gentle reminders that the world still had good in it. When he hung up, Daniel sat in silence for a long while, staring at the dark screen of his phone. That was why he couldn't walk away. Because every child deserved the same safety he had tried to give Clara when they were young. Emma deserved someone who wouldn't look away. He turned back to the computer, determination sharpening his features. If Carl Turner wasn't real, then the truth had to be buried in the records somewhere. He pulled utility bills for the apartment, tracing them back through months of service. One name popped up, different from the one given. A Thomas Riker. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That name did bring up something. A misdemeanor charge in another state. A previous address near a foster home. A pattern small but suspicious, of moving frequently, never staying in one place too long. The puzzle pieces began to shift into place. Finally, he pulled up the national database for missing children. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he typed in the parameters. Female, age 6 to 8, brown hair, reported within the last 3 months. The system processed. The seconds stretched, feeling heavier with each tick of the clock. Then a profile appeared. Name, Emma Carter. Age 7. Missing from Willow Creek, 2 towns over. Last seen 3 weeks ago. Daniel's breath caught. He clicked the photo attached, and his chest tightened. There she was, the same round cheeks, the same wide brown eyes, the same look of innocence he had seen in the supermarket. It was her. Emma. He leaned back in his chair, pulse hammering, a mix of triumph and dread colliding in his chest. The pieces had snapped together, and the picture they painted was chilling. She wasn't just a little girl with an uneasy guardian. She was missing. Stolen. And she was upstairs in that shabby apartment with a man who had already buried his real name. Daniel clenched his fists against the desk, the glow of the screen burning in his vision. The clock ticked in the silence of the precinct. There was no more doubt. No more waiting. The hunt had begun. Daniel prints Emma's report, heart-pounding, knowing the truth, but also knowing how dangerous the next step will be. The precinct felt heavier than usual, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as Daniel strode down the narrow hallway, clutching the missing child report so tightly that the paper edges cut into his palm. His boots echoed against the linoleum, each step powered by adrenaline and anger. He had no time for the bureaucracy, no patience for another dead end. He needed Miller to see this. He needed him to stop brushing it off as paranoia. When he reached the sergeant's office, he didn't bother knocking, just pushed the door open and dropped the folder onto the desk with a loud thwack. Miller looked up from his paperwork, frowning at the sudden intrusion. "Reyes," Miller said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "you planning to knock a hole through my desk next time?" Daniel ignored the jab, flipping the report open so the photo stared back at both of them. Emma Carter, age 8, reported missing nearly 2 weeks ago. Her wide eyes, the innocence in them, screamed louder than any argument Daniel could make. He tapped the page with 2 fingers, his voice tight but controlled. "This is her. This is the girl I saw at the supermarket. And she's in that apartment building." Miller leaned back, sighing, rubbing his temple as though trying to chase away a headache. "You don't know that, Reyes. You've got suspicion, sure, but suspicion doesn't hold in court. It doesn't get us a warrant. You can't." "I heard her," Daniel cut in sharply, his patience fraying. "I saw the fear in her eyes. You're telling me we're supposed to sit on our hands while a kid, Sarge, is living God knows what kind of nightmare 2 blocks from where we sit?" Miller's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the photo, his thumb tapping absently against his desk. Finally, he exhaled, long and heavy, as though the weight of every failed case and every broken family was pressing against his chest. "You want surveillance?" he asked, his voice lower now, reluctant but resigned. "Fine. But I'm not sending a whole team on a hunch. You get one night. Low profile. You keep your eyes open, you gather what you can. But you don't kick down that door unless you've got hard proof." It wasn't the victory Daniel wanted, but it was more than he expected. He gave a single sharp nod, the fire in his chest burning brighter. One night was all he needed. The world outside seemed colder that evening, the streets quieter as Daniel parked his unmarked cruiser across from the crumbling apartment complex. The building's facade was chipped and weary, its bricks stained with the passage of years, windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes in the night. The air carried the faint tang of damp concrete and cigarette smoke, the kind of smell that lingered in forgotten corners of the city. Daniel settled into his seat, binoculars in hand, every sense alive. The first hours passed slowly. He watched tenants come and go, an older woman carrying grocery bags that looked too heavy for her thin arms, a teenager on a skateboard, a man in a stained jacket muttering to himself as he fumbled with his keys. Ordinary lives playing out in the shadow of something dark and hidden. Each time the door to apartment 2C opened, Daniel's heart jumped, but it was always the man, Carl, or whatever his real name was, emerging briefly before retreating again. The minutes bled into hours. Daniel scribbled notes, times, movements, descriptions, his handwriting hurried but precise. This was his proof in the making, the silent story unfolding in the glow of streetlights. He sipped coffee gone bitter with age, the taste grounding him as fatigue threatened to creep in. And then, sometime past 10, he saw it. The curtain in the second-floor window shifted. Just slightly. Daniel froze, binoculars snapping into place. His pulse roared in his ears. There she was. Emma. She stood framed by the worn fabric, clutching a small teddy bear to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale in the dim glow behind her, eyes wide and glassy. She pressed her forehead briefly against the glass, her lips moving in words Daniel couldn't hear. Her small shoulders trembled, and even from across the street, Daniel could see the way she seemed to shrink into herself, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her tiny frame. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The sight of her hit harder than any punch he had ever taken. This wasn't just a case file. This wasn't just a photo in a report. This was a child scared, fragile, alive. His hand pressed against the steering wheel, knuckles white. He whispered into the silence of the car, barely audible but heavy with conviction. "Hold on, kid. I see you. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Emma lifted her hand, pressing it weakly to the glass. It was the smallest gesture, but to Daniel it felt monumental, like she was reaching across the void for help. His chest ached with the urge to run across the street, to tear down that door and carry her out into the night. But he stayed rooted, because promises without proof wouldn't save her. He needed to be patient. He needed to be smarter than the man keeping her trapped. The curtain fell back into place. The window went dark. Midnight came slowly, dragging its weight across the empty street. Daniel's eyes burned with fatigue, but he forced himself to stay sharp, to keep watch. The city outside had gone quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your skin, making every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. Then movement. A figure approached the building. Tall, broad-shouldered, his stride purposeful. He wasn't the tenant Daniel had been watching. This was someone new. The man carried a large bag slung over one shoulder, its bulk straining against the seams. His face was half hidden beneath a cap pulled low, and he glanced around the street before entering the complex, moving with the kind of caution that spoke of secrets. Daniel's grip tightened on the binoculars as he tracked the man's movements. He disappeared inside, swallowed by the stairwell's shadows. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Visitors at midnight carrying heavy bags rarely meant anything good. He checked his watch. 12:04 a.m. He scribbled it down, his pen digging hard into the page. His instincts screamed that the noose was tightening, that whatever was happening behind those walls was escalating. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his breath. His promise still echoed in his ears, "Hold on, kid. I see you." And as the apartment's window flickered with light once more, Daniel knew the night was far from over. The mysterious visitor has arrived. The trap is tightening. Daniel braces himself for what comes next. The minutes after midnight dragged on like a slow bleed, the silence inside Daniel's unmarked cruiser punctuated only by the ticking of the dashboard clock and the occasional hiss of tires passing on distant streets. His focus stayed locked on the dark apartment building, its brickwork standing tired and lifeless under the street lamps. The man with the bag had slipped inside nearly half an hour ago, and though the exterior gave nothing away, Daniel's instincts churned like a storm. Something about the secrecy, the timing, the heavy bag, it stank of a transaction, and not the kind that left anyone better off. He shifted in his seat, notebook open on the dash, pen poised. He jotted the timestamp, 12:04, unidentified male enters complex with duffel. The letters pressed heavy into the paper, as though the act of writing might anchor the truth in place. His hand hovered, then scribbled another note, potential trafficking link. Suspect may not be guardian. The thought settled uneasily in his gut. Until now, there had been a thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, the man's story about Emma being a niece had some twisted edge of truth. But visitors at midnight with hidden packages rarely belonged to doting family. Through his binoculars, Daniel kept vigil. Once, the curtains on the second floor twitched, a faint glow spilling from within. His breath hitched, but the shadow that passed was too large to be Emma, likely one of the men, moving about in silence. He gritted his teeth, forcing patience, even as his pulse demanded action. The street outside remained eerily empty. No drunks wandering home from bars, no cabs passing by, not even the soft hum of a late-night jogger. It felt like the world had folded itself into quiet just for this moment, as though holding its breath alongside him. That quiet pressed against his ears, and in it came a voice from memory, his father's, deep and steady. "You don't do the right thing because it's easy, Danny," the voice murmured, carried from decades ago when Daniel was no older than Emma. "You do it because it's right, even if it costs you." Daniel blinked, grounding himself in the soundless car. His father had been a cop too, the kind who carried integrity like armor, who never bent even when the world tried to break him. That example lived in Daniel's bones, shaping every decision, every case. But the reminder tonight cut sharper than usual, because the choice looming wasn't just about rules. It was about risk, to Emma, to himself, to what justice even meant. The door to the building creaked open at 1:12 a.m., pulling him back to the present. The man with the bag reappeared, but the bag now sagged lighter against his side, its bulk noticeably diminished. His movements were brisk, head low, the kind of body language that screamed secrecy. Daniel raised his binoculars, zooming in on the man's face as he stepped beneath the lamplight. He caught just enough of the features, the narrow jaw, the scar near his eyebrow, the darting eyes, to burn them into memory. Daniel's notebook snapped open again. He wrote furiously, "Male suspect exits. Bag lighter. Scar left eyebrow. Possible handoff complete." He leaned forward, catching the glow of a license plate as the man crossed the street, and slipped into a battered sedan parked against the curb. The engine sputtered, then rumbled alive. Daniel raised his phone, snapping a blurry but usable photo of the plates. He scribbled the numbers down as backup, heart pounding with the satisfaction of hard evidence stacking up. But even as the man drove off, vanishing into the arteries of the city, the pit in Daniel's stomach only deepened. Deals in the dark meant movement of goods, and if Emma was part of that system, the clock was ticking faster than he dared to admit. Dawn bled into the city in pale streaks of gray and gold, the streets coming alive with morning commuters and restless pigeons. Daniel hadn't slept. His car smelled faintly of stale coffee and tension, his eyes gritty from hours of watching. Yet when the apartment door finally opened around 8, all fatigue evaporated. Carl emerged first, dressed casually, trying for the look of an ordinary tenant heading out for errands. But then came Emma. Her small hand gripped his tightly, too tightly, as though it were both leash and chain. She looked paler than ever, her hair uncombed, her teddy bear absent. She walked stiffly, her steps hesitant, eyes darting toward the street as though hoping, praying for someone to notice. Daniel's chest clenched at the sight. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to run across the street and scoop her away. But impulse wouldn't save her. Not yet. He slid lower in his seat, starting his engine as quietly as possible. The tires hummed as he eased into traffic, tailing at a careful distance. Every move had to be calculated. Too close, and Carl would notice. Too far, and he'd lose them. The car inched through the city, weaving from residential streets to busier arteries, then back into quieter industrial zones. Daniel's pen scrawled notes even as his eyes stayed locked on their vehicle. 8:43, suspects depart. Route irregular. Heading east. His pulse quickened when they turned toward the edge of town, where the skyline gave way to hollow warehouses and abandoned lots. The deeper they went, the heavier the air seemed to grow, filled with the ghosts of industry long dead. Graffiti scarred the walls, windows gaped hollow like broken teeth, and the streets lay barren except for the occasional rusted-out car skeleton. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel, his jaw set. He could feel the story sharpening around him, narrowing to a point of danger. This wasn't random. This wasn't errands. This was a destination chosen with purpose, and that purpose was dark. Carl's car slowed, blinker flashing. Daniel eased back, letting a delivery truck slide between them just in time to mask his tail. Through the narrow gap, he watched as they turned into a fenced-off lot, the gates bent inward where they'd been forced open long ago. Beyond them loomed a warehouse, its corrugated walls rusting, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The car rolled to a stop near the yawning entrance, its shadow swallowing them whole. Daniel pulled over 2 blocks away, engine idling as his heartbeat thundered in his ears. He scribbled one last note, his hand trembling slightly. 8:59, suspects enter abandoned warehouse. Emma present. Possible trafficking hub. The pen slipped from his fingers. He stared out at the skeletal building, its hollow frame silhouetted against the weak morning sun. Everything in him screamed that this was it, the center of the web, the place where answers waited, where Emma's fate teetered on a knife's edge. And as silence settled heavy around him once again, he realized the trap wasn't just tightening around Carl and his accomplice. It was tightening around all of them. The warehouse loomed like a carcass picked clean by time, its ribcage of rusted beams silhouetted against the pale morning light. Daniel approached with every nerve taut, each step muffled against gravel that crunched too loudly beneath his boots. He kept low, hugging the shadows of overturned crates and twisted metal fences, his breath measured into slow, shallow pulls so as not to betray himself. The place smelled of damp wood, oil, and something metallic that hinted of decay. His pulse thudded in his ears, a steady drumbeat beneath the cavernous silence. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different, personal, fragile, like one wrong move would shatter not only his life but Emma's fragile hope of freedom. The entrance gaped wide before him, a jagged maw of bent steel doors. He paused there, crouched against the frame, listening. The echo of voices seeped out, faint at first, then clearer as he pressed himself closer. 2 men, maybe 3, speaking in low tones that carried a mix of irritation and menace. "Keep the girl quiet," one voice hissed, gruff and impatient. "We don't need her drawing attention." "Yeah, well, she's been crying since last night." "She won't shut up," another answered, frustration thinly veiling cruelty. The words clawed into Daniel's chest. His grip on his flashlight tightened until his knuckles ached. Every instinct screamed to charge in, but he forced himself to stillness. Impulsiveness here would mean chaos, and chaos meant Emma's life in the crossfire. He leaned in, straining to catch every syllable, every clue. Through a narrow slit in the rusted siding, Daniel caught a glimpse inside. The warehouse interior sprawled cavernous, littered with stacks of old pallets and oil drums, shafts of dusty light spilling through cracked windows above. And there, in the center of it all, sat Emma. She was tied to a chair, thin ropes cutting into her small wrists. Her teddy rested limply in her lap, the fur matted from her grip. Her wide eyes scanned the room with that primal fear only children know, darting between the shadows where her captors lingered. She looked smaller than ever, fragile and ghost-like under the harsh strip of daylight that fell across her. Her lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak but knew better. That image branded itself into Daniel's mind with brutal clarity, fueling both his anger and his resolve. He ducked back behind the siding, heart racing. With shaking fingers, he pulled his radio from his belt, pressing the button to call in backup. Unit 12 requesting immediate assistance. Abandoned warehouse east sector, child hostage situation, he whispered, voice low but firm. He waited for the crackle of a reply. Nothing. Just static. He tried again, repositioning, shifting angles, lifting the device higher. Still nothing but white noise, a hollow reminder of the metal walls swallowing every signal. His stomach dropped. Cut off. Alone. For a long moment he sat frozen, weighing the impossible. Wait here, try to find a signal outside, and risk whatever those men were planning for Emma in the next few minutes? Or act now, storm the warehouse solo, with no guarantee of coming out alive, or keeping Emma safe. His training whispered restraint, patience, strategy. But his heart, the same heart that had heard Emma's muffled sob through the apartment wall days ago, the same heart that had whispered promises in the dark, thundered a different command, now. Inside, the voices rose, sharper, angrier. She's useless if she won't stop crying, one man snapped, his tone cutting like glass. Then make her stop, another answered, followed by the scrape of a chair against concrete. Daniel's blood ran cold. He couldn't see them anymore, but he imagined their boots drawing closer to her, the towering shadows falling across her small frame. Emma's breathing quickened, even from a distance. It carried faintly, a sharp rhythm of panic that pierced him. He clenched his fists, sweat slick on his palms, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. He knew he had only seconds to decide. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, but his mind burned clear with one truth. He couldn't stand by, not again, not while a child's life teetered on the edge of violence. His father's voice returned, steady as a drumbeat. Do it because it's right. Even if it costs you. Daniel adjusted his stance, drawing his sidearm with deliberate precision, the weight of the metal grounding him. His free hand brushed over the warehouse wall, feeling the ridges of rust, anchoring himself in the reality of what he was about to do. He inhaled once, sharp and deep, steadying his heartbeat. Inside, the men's voices spiked, a rising argument layered with menace. One of them barked something Daniel couldn't fully catch, but the sound of Emma's muffled whimper followed, soft, desperate, terrified. That sound tore through him, a blade slicing hesitation clean away. He leaned closer to the doorway, pressing his back against the cool steel, eyes locked on the interior shadows. His body thrummed with adrenaline, each sense magnified, the smell of oil thick in his nostrils, the scrape of boots echoing across the concrete, the fragile rustle of Emma shifting in her chair. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Hold on, kid. Just a little longer." Then, like the final tick before detonation, the men's footsteps drew closer to Emma. One shouted, his voice cruel and commanding. The decision was no longer a choice. Daniel shifted his weight forward, every muscle tensed, ready to break through the doorway. The moment snapped like a taut wire breaking. Daniel's body moved before his mind could second-guess, driven by instinct, training, and something deeper, rage, determination, a promise that no child would be lost on his watch again. He shoved the steel door wide, the hinges groaning in protest, and the sudden crash reverberated through the cavernous warehouse like thunder. The men spun around in alarm, faces caught in a wash of pale light from the doorway. "Police!" Daniel barked, voice sharp and commanding, his sidearm leveled steady in his hand. His tone carried more than authority. It carried intent, a warning that cut through the stale air. For a second, everything froze, dust motes hanging in beams of light, the men's eyes wide in shock, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The man nearest to her cursed, his hand jerking back from her shoulder, retreating half a step. The other two shifted uneasily, caught between fight and flight. Daniel's gaze swept them with the cold precision of a hawk, his stance unwavering, his finger resting against the trigger guard. "Step back. Hands where I can see them," he ordered, each word clipped and deliberate. Emma's wide eyes lifted, finding him. For a moment, disbelief painted her face, then relief cascaded through her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her lips trembled, but she whispered so softly he almost didn't hear. "I knew you'd come." The words struck Daniel like a blow and a bomb all at once. For a heartbeat, the warehouse dissolved, the shadows, the criminals, the danger, and all he saw was her, clutching that battered teddy bear like a lifeline, her fragile trust resting squarely on his shoulders. It hardened his resolve like steel. One of the men snapped out of his shock, snarling, "You picked the wrong place to play hero cop." His hand dipped toward his belt. Daniel's voice cut sharper. "Don't." The man froze, then glanced at his companions. They were jittery, desperate, the kind of men who made reckless choices. Daniel saw it in their eyes, the calculation, the weighing of odds. He had seconds, maybe less. Keeping his weapon trained on them, he edged forward, step by steady step, until he reached Emma's chair. He crouched quickly, never letting his eyes leave the men, and sliced the rope binding her wrists with the small knife he always carried. Emma gasped as the tension slackened and her arms fell free. She immediately clutched the teddy to her chest, pressing herself against his side, as though she'd been waiting for this embrace all along. "Stay low. Stay behind me," Daniel whispered, his tone softer now, meant only for her. She nodded vigorously, eyes wide, lips pressed tight to keep from crying out. Then the warehouse erupted into motion. One man lunged forward, swinging a length of pipe he must have grabbed from a stack nearby. Daniel pivoted, his free arm raising instinctively to block, the impact jarring through his forearm like a shockwave. He shoved Emma back with his body, twisting to keep her shielded. The second man darted toward the exit, perhaps to cut them off or to call reinforcements. The third hovered, uncertain, his weight shifting as if ready to pounce. Daniel fired a single warning shot into the air. The sound cracked like lightning, echoing off the warehouse walls, a deafening reminder of who held control. The men flinched, hesitation flickering in their movements. "That was your one warning," Daniel growled. His voice, steady and unshaken, carved through the chaos. "Next one won't miss." For a breath, silence reigned, save for Emma's trembling breaths against his leg. Then slowly, the man with the pipe lowered it, his jaw clenched tight. The uncertain one backed away, hands lifted in surrender. The one who'd run for the exit cursed and slipped into the shadows, vanishing deeper into the warehouse's labyrinth. Daniel knew they didn't have time. Backup might never arrive, his radio was useless here, and the longer they lingered, the greater the risk. He shifted, scooping Emma into his arms, her small frame featherlight against him. She clutched the teddy bear between them, burying her face into his shoulder. "I've got you," he whispered, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "We're getting out of here." Every step toward the door felt like a mile. His ears strained for movement, for footsteps behind him, for the scrape of metal or the click of a weapon being readied. Shadows danced wildly as he moved, his senses stretched taut as a wire, but his focus never wavered. Emma's heartbeat pressed rapid against his chest, mirroring his own. At the threshold, the cool night air swept over them, damp and sharp, carrying the scent of rust and rain. He paused just long enough to scan the open yard beyond. Dark, empty. For a flicker of a second, he believed they might just make it out. Then a voice cut through the night, low and venomous. "Going somewhere?" Daniel spun, his stomach plummeting. From the shadows outside the warehouse, the original man, the one who had taken Emma from the park, stepped forward. His eyes gleamed cold under the flicker of a dying floodlight, a gun in his hand, raised and steady. Daniel's body tensed, every instinct coiling tight. Emma whimpered, clutching her teddy tighter, her little fingers digging into Daniel's jacket. He shifted her weight protectively, keeping his own weapon angled low but ready. The night seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the promise of violence. For all his preparation, all his resolve, Daniel realized the truth. They weren't safe yet. Not even close. The night pressed in around them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's breath clouded faintly in the cool air as he tightened his grip on Emma, her small frame tucked firmly against his side. The teddy bear was squashed between them, its faded fabric damp from her tears, yet somehow it seemed to pulse with quiet defiance, a symbol of her fragile courage. Just a few feet away, under the flickering stutter of the old floodlight, the man stood with his gun raised, eyes locked on them like a predator cornering prey. "You made a mistake, officer," the man said, his voice calm, almost conversational, though his eyes glittered with venom. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Daniel didn't flinch. His own weapon was raised now, steady, though the weight of Emma against him complicated every movement. He had trained for standoffs, rehearsed countless scenarios, but this was different. A little girl's life pressed against his chest, every tremor of her body, reminding him that hesitation or miscalculation here could cost her everything. You've already lost, Daniel replied evenly, his voice carrying authority but tempered with quiet steel. It's over. Let her go, and maybe you'll still walk away alive. The man chuckled, a hollow, grating sound that carried no humor. Alive? Do you think I'm afraid of you? You're alone. No backup. No one knows you're here. His gun lifted higher, leveled directly at Daniel's chest. The only one walking away tonight is me. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The night seemed to still, holding its breath. Emma whimpered softly, clutching Daniel's shirt tighter. He felt the shiver in her frame, the pounding of her small heartbeat. He bent his head just slightly, whispering without breaking eye contact with the man. Stay strong, Emma. I've got you. Her small voice trembled, muffled against his shoulder, but the words were clear enough to reach his ear. I trust you. Those 3 words ignited something deep inside him. A promise. A responsibility greater than any badge. He couldn't fail her. Not now. The standoff stretched, seconds dragging like hours. Daniel's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. He couldn't shoot first, not with Emma in his arms. He couldn't retreat, there was nowhere to go. He had to wait, had to bide his time until the man made the smallest mistake. Then, as if the universe conspired to force the moment, a distant metallic clang echoed across the yard. A loose sheet of corrugated metal, stirred by the night wind, smacked against the side of the warehouse. The sharp sound fractured the silence. The man's gaze flickered instinctively for the briefest fraction of a second. It was all Daniel needed. In that sliver of opportunity, Daniel shifted, lowering Emma to the ground swiftly but gently, pushing her toward the cover of a rusted steel drum, just a few feet away. Stay down. Don't move, he whispered, urgency lacing his tone. Emma obeyed, crouching low, her teddy clutched like armor as she slid behind the drum. The man cursed, realizing the move too late, and his finger tightened on the trigger. The gun barked, a deafening crack tearing the night apart. The bullet whipped past, sparking against concrete, but Daniel had already rolled to the side, his body a blur of controlled precision. His own weapon snapped up, sights aligned, fingers squeezing. The return shot split the air. The man staggered back, the bullet grazing his arm, sending his gun hand jerking wildly. He roared in pain and fury, his weapon clattering against the asphalt before skittering into the shadows. For a heartbeat, victory seemed close, but predators didn't fall so easily. With a snarl, the man lunged forward, grabbing a length of chain from the ground, swinging it with brutal force. Daniel braced, ducking as the chain whipped overhead, the metal links shrieking through the air. Sparks flew as it collided with the warehouse wall. Emma's scream cut through the chaos, sharp and terrified. Daniel! The sound fueled him. He surged forward, driving his shoulder into the man's chest, the impact knocking them both to the ground. They grappled, the chain thrashing wildly between them, clanging against concrete. Daniel's muscles strained, every nerve alight with the struggle for dominance. The man was strong, fueled by rage and desperation, but Daniel was stronger, anchored not just by training, but by purpose. You don't get to hurt her, Daniel snarled, wrestling the chain away. He drove his fist into the man's jaw, the crack echoing like a gunshot. The man reeled, blood spraying from his mouth, but he didn't relent. With animal fury, he lunged again, tackling Daniel into the dirt. They rolled, grappling, shadows twisting and colliding under the sickly glow of the floodlight. Each punch, each kick, each grunt of exertion rang out like drumbeats in the night. Emma crouched behind the steel drum, eyes wide, trembling but silent, clutching her teddy as if it might somehow protect Daniel too. The man's hands wrapped around Daniel's throat, squeezing, crushing. Spots danced in Daniel's vision, his lungs burning. But then, through the haze, his eyes flicked sideways. Just a foot away, the chain glimmered faintly in the moonlight, coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. Summoning the last reserves of strength, Daniel twisted, wrenching free just enough to seize the chain. He swung it upward in a wide arc, the heavy links cracking against the man's ribs with a sickening thud. The grip on his throat loosened, air rushing back into his lungs in a ragged gasp. He didn't stop. With relentless precision, he struck again, forcing the man back, then pressed the chain against his opponent's throat, pinning him to the ground. The man thrashed, clawing, but Daniel's grip was unbreakable, forged by every ounce of resolve he had left. "This ends now," Daniel growled, his voice low, vibrating with fury and exhaustion. The man's struggles weakened, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, his body went limp, his head lolling to the side. Daniel released the chain, chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. He stayed crouched, weapon still at the ready, but the man didn't move. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Only Daniel's heavy breaths and the distant hum of the city filled the night. Then, softly, like a bird peeking from its nest, Emma's voice broke through. "Daniel!" He turned, eyes immediately softening as he spotted her small form creeping from behind the steel drum. She clutched the teddy bear so tightly her knuckles were white, but her eyes, though wide with fear, shone with something else. Trust. Relief. "It's okay," Daniel whispered, rising to his feet, motioning her forward. His knees ached, his throat throbbed, his muscles screamed, but none of it mattered. She was safe. For now. She ran to him, flinging her arms around his waist, burying her face against him. He wrapped his arm around her gently, pulling her close, shielding her with his frame. His heart ached with the weight of the moment, but also with gratitude. She was alive, clinging to him, still believing in him. But even as relief washed over him, reality crashed back in. The man might be down, but others could be near. The warehouse was a hive, and predators rarely hunted alone. He couldn't linger. "We have to move," he whispered urgently, crouching to meet her eyes. "Stay close. Don't let go of my hand." She nodded, clutching his fingers tightly, her teddy bear dangling from her other arm. Together, they stepped cautiously into the open yard, shadows stretching long across the cracked pavement. The night was far from over, and just as they reached the edge of the yard, headlights flared in the distance, cutting across the darkness like a blade. A vehicle approached, engine growling low and steady. Daniel froze, shielding Emma instinctively. His heart hammered as the light swept closer. Were they allies or another wave of enemies? The cliffhanger tightened like a noose. The rescue was not complete. The fight was not finished. The black SUV rolled to a stop, its headlights washing the yard in stark white glare. Daniel's body tensed, his arm instinctively wrapping tighter around Emma, shielding her from view. His weapon was still in hand, ready to fire if this was another trap. The driver's door opened slowly, and for a heartbeat his heart thundered with dread. Then, a familiar voice cut through the night. "Daniel! It's us!" Relief swept over him like a wave as two uniformed officers stepped out, weapons drawn, scanning the yard. Backup had arrived, later than he would have preferred, but here nonetheless. Daniel lowered his gun slightly, exhaling shakily as one of the officers rushed toward him. "Are you all right?" the officer asked, eyes darting between Daniel's battered frame and Emma's trembling form. Daniel gave a short nod. "We're alive. That's enough." He glanced back toward the limp figure on the ground, the man who had nearly taken everything. "Cuff him. He's not who he says he is." The officers moved swiftly, securing the unconscious man. As they rolled him over, the truth spilled out in fragments. False identification, hidden cash, coded messages on his phone. Piece by piece, the facade unraveled. He hadn't been Emma's uncle at all. He was part of a trafficking ring, one of many predators who preyed on silence, fear, and the overlooked. Daniel's stomach turned at the thought. How many others had been taken before Emma? How many children had gone unnoticed, their voices unheard? The realization sank heavy into his chest, but he forced himself to focus on the child clutching his hand. She was here. She was safe. That was what mattered tonight. The ride back into town was quiet. Emma sat pressed against Daniel in the back seat, her teddy bear still clutched in her arms, her wide eyes staring out the window as the night blurred by. He kept a steady arm around her, offering warmth, protection, and the silent promise that she was not alone anymore. At the station, the reunion happened in a rush of tears and relief. Emma's mother burst through the doors, collapsing to her knees the moment she saw her daughter. Emma sprinted into her embrace, the teddy bear bouncing at her side, her sobs muffled against her mother's chest. Daniel stood a few steps back, throat tight, watching the scene unfold. He'd seen countless reunions in his career, families torn apart, then stitched back together, but this one was different. This one carried the weight of every whispered plea Emma hadn't spoken, every small clue she had left like breadcrumbs for someone to follow. Her mother looked up through her tears, eyes meeting Daniel's. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "You saved her life." He shook his head gently. "She saved herself. She never gave up. She just needed someone to listen. For once, words failed him. He simply placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder when she turned to wave at him, her face streaked with tears, but her smile fragile and real. That image etched itself into his heart, a reminder of why he wore the badge, not for authority, not for recognition, but for moments like this. The days that followed were a blur of reports, interrogations, and quiet reflection. The man was just a link in a larger chain. Evidence from his phone led to safe houses, false documents, and a network that spanned further than anyone had realized. The investigation grew, but Daniel knew this was just the beginning. Stopping one predator didn't erase the danger. But it mattered. Emma mattered. Sleep was elusive. At night, Daniel found himself replaying the moments, the gunfire, the fight, Emma's trembling voice whispering, "I knew you'd come." Sometimes he woke in a sweat, throat raw as if the man's grip were still crushing him. Yet every time doubt crept in, so did Emma's smile. That small, resilient light reminded him that even in the darkest cases, there was hope. 3 days later, the sun was warm, the sky stretched wide and blue, and Daniel found himself at the town park. Emma was there with her mother, sitting cross-legged on the grass near the swings. Her teddy bear was beside her, it seems patched clumsily with bright pink thread. She was laughing, pure, unguarded laughter that rang like bells through the air. Daniel lingered at the edge of the path for a moment, simply watching. The girl who had once clung silently to shadows was now running across the grass, hair flying, joy spilling out of her in every step. It was the sound of healing, fragile but real. Her mother noticed him first, waving him over with a grateful smile. Emma turned, her face lighting up. "Daniel," she called, sprinting toward him, Teddy bouncing in her arms. He crouched as she reached him, bracing for the impact as she hugged him tightly. "You came," she said again, but this time it wasn't a desperate whisper. It was a joyful declaration. "I'll always come," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. They spent the afternoon together, sitting on a bench while Emma played on the swings, her laughter mingling with the breeze. Daniel and her mother spoke quietly, sharing fragments of what had been lost and what could now be rebuilt. Trust would take time, healing even longer, but Emma was on her way. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the park, Daniel leaned back, watching Emma pump her legs higher on the swing, her smile reaching toward the sky. In that moment, the world felt lighter, safer, as if the darkness had been pushed back just a little further. He thought about the signs, the teddy bear clutched too tightly, the silence that spoke louder than words, the eyes that begged without daring to ask. How many times had he passed by similar children, too busy, too distracted, too unwilling to believe something might be wrong? The thought unsettled him. But Emma had taught him something vital. The smallest signs mattered. A glance, a whisper, a moment of hesitation, they could be the difference between despair and salvation. If he could carry one lesson forward, it was this: never ignore the quiet cries for help. That night, as Daniel walked home beneath the stars, the air cool and calm around him, he felt a strange peace settle into his chest. The fight wasn't over, not for the world, not for others like Emma, but for this little girl. Safety had been restored. And that was enough. And so Emma's laughter returned, her childhood slowly pieced back together, not through grand gestures, but through awareness, through kindness, and through someone who refused to look away. Sometimes the greatest rescues come not from strength, but from listening to the silence and to the cries we often miss. Let Emma's story remind us all: pay attention to the small signs. Trust your instincts. And above all, never underestimate the power of hope. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales that remind us of the quiet strength within us all.